Okay, so this video is probably going to end up being a bit longer than it usually is, but I'm going to break this up into little smaller topics that aren't necessarily enough for a video on their own. Mainly I just want to focus on kind of cleaning up the world a bit and making things a bit more, easier to navigate through and easier to use. So the very first thing, and I got asked a couple questions about this, is how do you organize your hierarchy? And I honestly can't believe it's taken me this long to go over this, but the main way in Unity to do this, since you can't create a folder, if you right click here, there's no option to create a folder. Instead, what you do is you create an empty game object, so create empty. In general, you should always reposition this to 0, 0, 0, and then have this be a container for different things. So for example, this is going to be my enemy container. And so then in here, I'm going to put all of my enemies. So the 3 different logs that I currently have in my scene are all going to go inside this one container. Then if I collapse the container, that makes things a little bit more simple. And since the main container is at 0, 0, 0, then the XYZ positions of these are still where they should be in the world. If I change my container position, like if I leave it at whatever it generated at, 15 something, then the log positions will no longer relate to where they are in world space. So it's important when you're doing this that you need to make sure that your empty container is repositioned to be 0, 0, 0. All right, cool. So what else do I need? I'll create empty. This one's going to be for objects. And again, I'm going to reposition this at 0, 0, 0. And I'll put in my treasure chest, the pot that I've been using. I'll put in that sign. And then I'll make another empty, and I'll call this transitions. And I will reset this to 0, 0, 0. And this will get scene transition, dungeon transition, and then all of my room transfers are going to go in there too, so that all my transitions are in one spot. Let's see. Oh, this is the game object I was using to position stuff. I can just get rid of this, I think. It's not going to hurt anything. The event system goes with the canvas, so you don't need to change that, and the grid is there for the world. If you want to rename it, you can. So I'm just going to call this Unity tile map. And then I've got my, these are my little tests here that aren't active. So there we go. Our hierarchy is a bit more clean. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is how to keep your code clean. There's a phrase, or I guess a term that programmers use for code that is either poorly written, poorly commented, or poorly structured, and they call it smelly, which, sure. But essentially what smelly means is either your code is done in a way that is not easy for other people to understand. You have a tendency to use magic numbers, which I have one right here. A magic number is just a number that appears in the code out of nowhere. It's not declared anywhere. It's not a variable. It's just a number that appears. No one knows where you got that number aside from you. So if somebody else were to come in and start editing your code, they wouldn't know what to replace that with. Also, if you have just this long string of variables declared, they should be declared at the top of the script in general. Depending on when you learned how to program, you might have learned that if something is a variable that is local to this class, you should do m underscore before it. But in newer versions of programming that I've seen, textbooks anyway, they don't do that anymore, but some people do that. I also like to make sure that I have all of my variables kind of separated. So what I'll do here is I will separate my variables out by using a, what is it called? A header. There we go. I'll use a header here, and in parentheses, in quotations, I'll tell what I want the header to be. And so first I'm going to do state machine. Then I've got my max health and my current health. So we'll do health stuff. I've got my name, attack, move speed. I could actually, let's just make this, instead of health stuff, we'll make it enemy stats, because all of that falls into stats. And then this last one here, I'm going to separate, because you might want to have, right now there's only one thing for the death effect, but you might want to have more. You might want to have a sound that plays, you might want to have a particle system. So just because there might be more things that you want when the enemy dies, I'm going to give this its own header. So I'm going to give this death effects. And generally what I like to do is every week or so that I've been working on a project, I like to go back through, look at my code, and make sure that there's not any magic numbers like there is right here, and that my variables are nicely commented like this. So I'm going to be doing this individually, and you guys can absolutely do this individually. You can of course choose to ignore me. I mean, if you're the only one who's working on your project, that's fine, but this isn't just for helping other people understand your project. It's for helping you understand your project if you come back to it after not having worked on it for 2 weeks. Because if you come back to this after having not worked on it for 2 weeks and you come to this random number that's in the script that worked when you made it work, but you have no idea where you got that from. If you have a variable and maybe even some comments to describe what the variable is, you're much more likely to remember what it was. So this 1F here, this is here from our death effect, which we put in a couple episodes ago. And I'm just going to make a private float, and I'll call this death, let's call this death effect delay, which is how long it's going to take for the death effect to be destroyed from the scene. And I'll set this equal to 1F by default. And then down here, I'll replace this 1F with death effect delay. All right, cool. So that's one thing that I definitely see with people who are new to programming, is a tendency to not necessarily be super neat and tidy with your work, which I totally understand as you're going through it. But it's always a good idea to take a small amount of time, maybe once a week while you're working on a project, to go back through, make sure you understand everything that was done here, and that you don't have any smells coming from your code. So, yeah. Okay, so sorry for that weird cut there. What I'm going to show you is an issue that comes up with the camera, but before I do that, I have to make sure that my dungeon scene is loaded to my build menu, and I don't think I actually covered this. No, I did for the house. I had to have. So what I want to do is I just want to go to my scenes here, have this open, and then I'm going to go to File, Build Settings, and make sure that my dungeon is added to that. So I can just add it like that. Alright, so the next thing we have to fix has to do with resetting the camera's position in the scene after we transition back to it from another scene. So the way that we're doing it right now, just to show you going to the dungeon, because the house isn't going to show this bug. This bug is only going to show up when we go to a scene that we enter from a scene other than where we started in the world. So first I'm going to go to the dungeon here, and there we go, loaded in the dungeon just fine. And if I go back to the main world, you'll see in the scene view, our player is where we want them to be, but the camera is trying to get down to the player, but it can't because the camera's minimum Y value hasn't been reset. The minimum Y value is still at -18, and it's trying to go further down from that. So what we want to do is when we're moving from one scene to another, we want to tell Unity if it needs to reset the camera's min and max position, what it needs to reset them to. So to do that here, what I'm going to do is go to my scripts. I'm going to open up my scriptable objects, and I'm going to open up the vector value script. Now, on the vector value, I believe I only had initial value before I started. This is like the third time I've recorded this video, and so I think I forgot to erase this, but I didn't erase it just in case. So we want to do just like what we're doing with the float value. We want to have an initial value and a default value. This default value is going to be where we want the vector to be in the scene, or the camera to be in the scene by default, which is when we first hit play. So then we're going to make sure that we're inheriting not just from scriptable object, but also from iSerialization callback receiver. Serialization is what happens when you hit play. Well, that's deserialization. Everything kind of unpacks itself, which is deserializing. And so we have this little method here. If public void on after deserialize, we're going to reset the initial value to be the default value. But we can change this initial value throughout the different scenes that we're in based on what that scene needs it to be. So the other thing I'm going to open up here is the scene transition script. And just like what I've been doing, I'm going to put nice headers here in my code while I'm at them. So header, this is going to be, let's say, value running in game. And then this is going to be header value by default when starting. Okay, and then in my scene transition here, I've got some, let's call this header new scene variables. And so we're going to send it the scene that we want to load, where we want the player to be in that scene, the vector storage, and then this is going to be header transition. That's not how you spell transition. Transition variables. All right, cool. Now I want to make also a reference to the camera min and camera max. So I'm going to say public vector value camera min and public vector value camera max. All right, cool. So save this, and what we want to do here is when we enter the new scene, so before we actually enter that new scene, while we're waiting here, I want to reset the camera's boundaries to be whatever that min and max are. So I need to have a reference to the camera as well. Actually, I don't, because those vector values, the camera is going to reference those itself. So I want to say, since I have these two vector values, I want to also have a vector 2, and we'll call this camera new max, and a public vector 2 camera new min for us to actually set those values. Pardon me, similar to what we're doing with the vector 2 for player position and the vector value for storing it. So these are just for storage. So what I want to do here is I'll create a little helper method just to keep things nice and organized. We'll call this public void reset camera bounds. And then in here, we'll call that from our fade coroutine. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll say, maybe, there we go. And what we'll do is we'll say camera max is equal to camera new max. Which one is the vector value? Camera max. So camera max dot initial value, and then camera max dot initial value is equal to camera new min, and that needs to be camera min, not camera max. All right, cool. So this is going to reset the boundaries of the camera. Now I'm going to save this really quickly. Go into Unity here. I want to go into my scriptable objects and into my, let's create a new folder here for the camera value specifically, so that we can have min and max values for our different scenes that we're using. Right now I only have 3 scenes, but I want to have more. So I'll make a folder. I'll call this camera min max. And then inside here, I'll create another folder, and I'll call this overworld, and create vector value, and I'll call this camera min. and create vector value, camera max. And right now, my default value for both of those should be whatever the default value is for my camera in the world right now. So my max position is 17, -6. So 17, -6 is the default value. And then my camera min right now is 8, -19. So for min, the default value is 8, -19. And you'll see that it automatically changes the initial value. That's that deserialization callback receiver working. So nothing should change from how we're working right now. If I hit play, the camera should follow the player from where they begin at. So, yep, that's working fine. Now, what I want to do is go to my main camera and my camera movement script, which I'm just going to open up here. And what I want to do is create a reference to these. So, first thing I'm going to do is, again, make a nice header for everything. So, header, and I'll call this position variables. And then this is going to be the animator. And then I'll make one more for header position reset. And this is going to be those two vector values. So I'm going to say public vector value. We'll call this cam min, and public vector value cam max. And then what I'll do in the start method here, I will set the max position and min position to be those. So I'm going to say max position is equal to cam max dot initial value, which, like I said, resets to default every time we run the program, not every time we load the scene. And min position is equal to cam max or cam min dot initial value. So if I'm right, then this should work so that our position changes when we move from scene to scene within one play session, but it should default back to where it should be normally. So I'm going to let that think for a second. And then, okay. All right. So let's give this a try. Probably going to fast forward a little bit here. Oh, right away, null reference exception error. So this needs to know what the camera min and camera maxes are. So I'm going to go to my scriptable objects, overworld, camera max, camera min, and then that transition to the dungeon. This is going to get, oh, okay. So for the dungeon, I need to make another set of camera min and max. So create vector value, camera min, and I'll put these in their own folder too. Vector value, camera max, and then create a new folder. We'll call this dungeon. And dungeon gets both of these. So I'm going to save my scene here really quickly just so I can check back at the dungeon what the camera min and max should be in there. So if I go to my, not my scripts, my scenes, I'm going to open up my dungeon, and camera min and max here should be 0, 0. Cool, that's easy. So then in my scriptable objects, dungeon, camera max 0, 0. I'm just going to type it in just to make sure it knows I actually did something with it. And camera min 0, 0. All right, cool. Now to save this scene, oh, and I need to set those values too. So making sure that I'm in the dungeon folder, I'm going to set the camera max and the camera min, and save this scene so that all those changes are saved. Go to my scenes folder, open up my sample scene, which is my overworld, main camera, overworld. This gets the camera min and camera max it already had. And then the dungeon transition is going to get the camera min and camera max from the dungeon folder. So camera max, camera min, save the scene again, pop back over to the dungeon, and then in here, my transition to the overworld is going to get the camera min, camera max from the overworld. Is it? No, it's going to get a different camera min and camera max because it needs to be set to be different. So what I'm going to do here is create a folder. We'll call this, actually, no. Okay, so the scene transition needs to have the camera min and camera max, but I need to tell it what the new camera min and new camera max are. Okay, that's right. Sorry, I confused myself for a second there. This is why it's bad to come back to your program after like a week without remembering. All right, so I have this set there. I'm going to save, but I'm going to go back to my scene here, back to my sample scene. Where's that little game object? Oh, I deleted it, didn't I? Good Lord. So I'm just going to create an empty game object again to be like my little marker to test things. So I want my camera max to be, let's see, this is negative 25. So what is, let's see, this is 4 by 3, 6, 12. So 6 less than negative 25 is negative 31. And then this is negative 50, so negative 44. All right. And then my x and y, or my x part should be the same. Okay, so my camera max is going to be negative 31, and my camera min is going to be negative 44. All right. Negative 31, negative 44, negative 31, negative 44. I don't have any paper nearby. All right. So negative 31, negative 44. All right, cool. So I'm going to save this. This ended up being way more complicated than I meant for it to be. I understood it, and then I didn't, and then I understood it again. So let's try this out. I'm going to fast forward while I get down there so I don't have to fill the empty air with nervous talking. All right, so moment of truth. Let's go into the dungeon. Woohoo, that worked. I was like 90% expecting it not to work. Let's see, fingers crossed. No. All right. But at least our camera. Oh, it's because I didn't change the X value. It thinks it needs to be 0. Okay, cool. At least I know what's wrong now. And if I click on the, if I go to my scriptable objects, since I deserialized, my camera min max for the overworld should be back to what it was. No, it's changed. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Because as soon as I hit play, the initial value should change back to the default value. Let's make sure. All right, cool, good. I do know what I'm talking about once in a while. Okay, so let's go back to the dungeon scene here, and let's fix that X part. So, all right, dungeon, and then let's look at our scriptable objects, camera, overworld. Max is 17, min is 8. All right. So max is 17, min is 8. All right. Oh, no. I didn't mean to do that for this. Good Lord. All right. I meant to do it for the scene transition. Max is 17, min is 8. All right, cool. So I'm going to save this and we'll try this again. This video is going to be way longer than I meant it to be. All right, so going back to my overworld scene, and again I'll fast forward me going to the door. Okay, moment of truth. All right, totally fine. Woohoo! All right. Again, 90% I expected that not to work, so the fact that it did makes me super happy. All right, cool. So today we fixed cleaning up your hierarchy. We talked about making sure your code doesn't smell, taking out magic numbers and documenting your variables and stuff for other people. And we finally fixed a camera issue that's been bugging me. We're going to fix an issue with the treasure chests because between scene loads, they become full again. So we need to fix that. And we'll do that by using something called the observer pattern. But I want to talk about what the observer pattern is first. So and that's what we're going to be talking about next. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the description down below. And there's a quick message coming afterwards, so feel free to pay attention or not. Up to you. And yeah, have yourselves a wonderful day. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving a like, subscribing to the channel, or telling a friend who might be interested. Also, please consider following me on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can earn access to tangible rewards, like early access to videos, backer-only videos and series, polls for future topics, streams, and even individual tutoring sessions. You can find a link to that in the description. And as always, have yourselves a wonderful day.